Hello Booktube, hello friends, welcome to Lizzie Faye Loves Books. I'm Elizabeth, and today I have a long overdue video for you. It is my summer wrap-up. Now I am including 4 months for this wrap-up. Of course, June, July, and August are the usual months that people think of as summer, and I needed another month to finish the summer romance book bingo, and I actually I'm going to count all the way through the end of September. Now, of course, summer officially ended, I think, on September 21st, and fall began on the 22nd. And I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe if I can get everything done by the actual end of summer. And I still needed the rest of September just to finish everything that I counted for the bingo. And I started a few other things that I finished after that, and I'm going to include those in this video as well. I'm not going to go over every single book that I read because that would take too long. And I've been talking about all these books all throughout the year, but I wanted to just give you a recap, tell you some of my totals and stats. I will tell you what books fit the prompts on my actual bingo card, even though I did read a book that I could count for every single one of the bingo prompts, and there were 80. And I read a total of 90 books for the 4 months, June, July, August, and September. Most of those were audio. Well, 2/3 were audio, a third was print. So let me just give you a few totals, and then I also want to tell you what my favorites were for the summer, and just sort of how my reading summer went in general. Now, of course, a lot of you know that I spent a lot of the summer in the hospital with my daughter, Emily. She had a total of 3 surgeries this summer. The first one was May 29th, and because it was supposed to be her main brain surgery, but he wasn't able to do it because she was hemorrhaging too much, they still took out her vagus nerve stimulator, but she only had to be in the hospital overnight. So we were home for the whole month of June, even though she was very lethargic and still didn't do a lot. I tried taking her to summer school one day and she slept through the whole day. So we just stayed home, rested up, and just prepared ourselves for the next surgery, which was scheduled for July 1st. So in the month of June, I did get a good bit of print reading done, and I tried an experiment where I started a new print book almost every day and tried to read at least a chapter or a small portion of each of those books as I built up my list. And it worked for a while because we were home, but then once the summer got rolling and we ended up being in the hospital and everything, I just couldn't maintain that amount of reading every day. So it was an experiment, though, where I sort of tested my limits, and I discovered that some days I could read some from maybe 6 different books, but now I feel like somewhere around 3 or 4 is really my comfort zone in how many print books I can read from each day. Now, I could do more some days depending on what I'm doing, but if I read a chapter a day from 3 different books and then still have my audiobooks going, I like that pace. And it doesn't allow me to finish as many print books as I want to, but it's still a pretty good amount, and I think it works for me. And they don't necessarily have to be from different genres either. I could be reading 2 romances or 2 nonfiction or whatever. It doesn't really matter. In fact, in November, I'm going to bump it up to 6 at a time because I have 6 books that I drew out of my nonfiction TBR jar several months ago, and I haven't read any of them. So I'm going to read a little of each of those every day until I get all of those read. And hopefully that will all be during the month of November. And I have a couple of other nonfiction books I'd like to read as well as other fiction books. But anyway, this is not a TBR video. This is a wrap-up, and I'm rambling. So let's get back to my summer wrap-up. So for the 4 months, I read a total of 90 books. 62 of those were on audio, and 28 of them were print books. Only one of the print books was a children's picture book, and I'll tell you about it later. I didn't originally plan on reading any children's picture books that I was going to count, but right at the end of the summer romance book bingo, I needed a book that was published the year I was born, and I realized that I had not picked out or read a book that was published in 1964. So I quickly did a search and I found that The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein was published in 1964, and I don't have a copy of that, but I was able to borrow it through my library on Overdrive. So I read it the last day of summer and I counted it for the Summer Romance Book Bingo. So in the month of June I finished 19 books, which was less than I read the other months, but that's because I was focusing more on print reading. And I was just saying in my last Friday Reads video that if I'm really focusing on print reading, then my audiobooks sort of get pushed aside a little bit. I don't make as much progress in them. And if I'm really focused on audiobooks, then I don't make as much progress with print books. So in June I finished 19 books, but I also had quite a few more books started that I began to finish the next couple of months. So in July I finished a total of 23 books, and then in August and September I finished 24 each. So that made a total of 90. Now, not all of the books for the Summer Romance Book Bingo were romances, and they didn't have to be. Sarah was specific about some of the categories being romances and some just being any book that met that criteria. So I tried to follow that closely, and if the prompt said that it needed to be a romance, then I at least try to count a book that had a romantic element in it, even if it wouldn't be categorized as an actual romance. So I feel okay about that. For the most part, I tried to count books that were romances for the prompts that said that they needed to be a romance. So that being said, I read 27 books that were romances, 15 books that I would consider women's fiction, and those could all fall under the category of women's fiction, but what I counted under women's fiction are books that are geared towards women that may have a romantic element, but the romantic element is not the main story theme. Then mysteries, I read 21, and most of those are cozy, but not all of them. I had a couple of book club books that were not cozy. Then I had Christian fiction, 15 books, and then 2 Christian nonfiction books. Then I had 1 graphic novel. I had 3 books that were rereads, and I had historical fiction, 10 books, 1 children's storybook, and that would be The Giving Tree, 6 books that were YA, and 8 books that were middle grade, and of those 8 books, 5 of those were on the Sunshine State list. I read 9 books for my in real life book clubs. I read 7 books that were for read-alongs or buddy reads. And one of my main focuses this year has been on series. So 55 of these 90 books were books that were part of series. Now, some of those were first in series books that I am not necessarily going to continue on with the series. I didn't really break that down to see exactly how many of the books would fall into that category, but there are 35 different series represented in the 55 books that I read that were part of series. And then within those totals, I finished or caught up with a total of 10 different series. So just quickly, I will run through the series that I finished. So I started and finished The Cat and the Stacks Mysteries by Miranda James. That was a total of 11 books. I finished the Amish Quilt Shop Mystery Series, and that was a total of 3 books. One of those was a novella. I finished the Cherry Cola Book Club series. That was a read-along that I started several months ago, and I had not read the last book, which was Book Club Babies. So I'm really happy that I finished that. And at this moment, I don't think I've gone back and wrapped that up on my Goodreads group and made any comments, so I apologize for that. I might still do a series review of that because I have a lot of thoughts on it. I had toyed with doing a live show, but I don't think there was enough people that read the series all the way through with me. But of course, any of you that did, please watch the video if and when I do it and make your comments in the comments, and we can chat about that there. So I did finish that. Then I finished a trilogy called the Texas Hill Country Trilogy by Lisa Wingate. I caught up with the Highland Bookshop Cozy Mystery Series by Molly McRae, and at the time there was only 2 books, but now I see that there is a 3rd one coming out, so I won't be caught up with that one for long. And then I also read the last 2 books of the Mark of the Lion trilogy by Francine Rivers. I listened to the most recent book in the Jamie Quinn mystery series by Barbara Venkataraman called Jeopardy in July. And then I read the most recent 2 books in the Stranger World series by Jack Castle. I also read the last book in the Yellow Rose trilogy by Lori Wick called City Girl. And I listened to the newest book in the Vintage National Park series by Karen Barnett called Ever Faithful. So I put all 90 of these books on a Goodreads shelf so that I could pull just this group up and compare, and I was able to count then how many books that I gave 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, and so forth. So of the 90 books, I gave 34 of them 5 stars. I've really been more generous with my 5-star reads as of late because I feel like if I really enjoyed a book and it made me happy emotionally, or it was compelling enough to make me still think about it, you know, weeks and months later, then why not give it 5 stars? So there were quite a lot of books that I felt like I just really loved, and I gave them 5 stars. Then there were 41 books that I rated 4 stars. So overall, I really enjoyed my summer. There were only 11 books that I rated 3 stars, only 3 books that I rated 2 stars, and only 1 book that I rated 1 star. And in case you're wondering what that book is, it is one of the books that I listened to on Audible for the Audible Escape Category Challenge. And the book is called Captured by Julia Barrett. And I can't even sum up this book, but I will encourage you to go and look at a review that I thought was really pretty funny and spot on. And that is a review by someone named Corduroy, and it should be the first one that comes up when you click on the book Captured. It's a 1-star review, and she only read, I think, 20% of the book, and still she got it right. Her review is very good, and it's funny, and I would definitely recommend reading the review even if you never take a look at the book. But it was definitely a book that was very erotic, it was crass, it was trashy, and it's just not my kind of book. The category I needed was galactic, and interestingly enough, almost all the galactic books on the Audible Romance package, just, you know, I went through cover after cover that just looked so steamy that I just wasn't interested in them. And this particular book looked fairly innocuous. It had a birdcage on the cover, and I thought, okay, maybe this one will do. And it was probably worse than many of the others that I bypassed. So anyway, it was a funny experience, but not a book that was for me at all. So that being said, I'll go ahead and tell you my 5 favorite books. And of course, I gave 5 stars to 34 different books. So I've pulled out what I think would be my top 5 for one reason or another. 2 of them were actually books that were sent to me for review by Waterbrook and Multnomah, and I'm so appreciative of that. One of them was Becoming Us by Robin Jones Gunn, and the other was Ever Faithful by Karen Barnett, which is the 3rd book in the Vintage National Park series. Now, I would even say that I loved the first one better than the 3rd one, but I read the first one previous to the summer, so I couldn't count it. But it's just a great series. I love it so much. And both of those books are faith-based. I forgot, I guess I could show you some of the books. Here is Ever Faithful by Karen Barnett. This is my ARC copy that was sent to me by the publisher, and I'm so thankful for it. This is Becoming Us by Robin Jones Gunn. It is supposed to be the first in a new series, so I am really looking forward to reading more as soon as they come out. 2 different book club books that I read turned out to be top favorites for the summer. One of them was A Fall of Marigolds by Susan Meissner. This was simply a beautiful book. It takes place in 2 different time periods, and both stories deal with tragedies that have happened in New York City. One of them, of course, was 9/11, and the other one was the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in 1911. And it was just a beautiful story. It's all tied together with this marigold print scarf, and I just would highly recommend it. It was wonderful. Another book club book that I read that I don't have an example of is Where the Crawdads Sing. I think it was a fantastic book, very compelling. I didn't love everything about it, but I loved it enough to make it one of my top 5 books. I can see what all the fuss is about, and I thought it was really fantastic. Now, some people complain that it's too sciencey, that there's too much about the wildlife and the animals and the fauna and flora and all of that. But I think that's part of its charm. That is a big part of the book, and that's what ties everything together. So I didn't mind that. I think I learned a lot by that. And as an honorable mention, I would also say The Beach House by Mary Alice Monroe would be up there probably in my top 10. And in that book, we learn a lot about turtles. So in amongst all of the fiction and the drama, we get to actually learn some things. And I think both of those books were very interesting because of that. And then the other one on my list of top 5 books from the summer is Village School by Miss Read. Now, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in another video that I'm so excited that I have found a series that pleases me just as much as the Jan Karen Mitford books. And I can see now why these were inspirations for Jan Karen to write the Mitford series, because they are full of just wonderful characters. It's an idyllic setting, and it's a small town, and the characters and what happens are just so good. It's so wonderful, and that almost makes it sound like nothing bad ever happens, and that's really not true. There are a lot of ups and downs that happen in the Fair Acre series, but it's just told in such a way that it makes you long for a simpler time. And I just absolutely love this book. This is the first in the series. I have already read the second one, and I'm really looking forward to getting started on the third one as soon as I finish up a few of my other print reads. But it's just a delightful series. Miss Read wrote about 40 books. 20 of them are from the Fair Acre series. So I have several years of wonderful reading ahead of me. I'm going to stretch them out as much as possible and just really will savor them and enjoy them. And I am really just in love with this series. So my main reading challenge for the summer was, of course, the Summer Romance Book Bingo, and it is hosted by Sarah from Steeped in Books. This was her second or third year doing this, and she made 80 prompts this year. So when you pulled up a card, you didn't know which of the 80 prompts you were going to get. So it took me the whole summer to get the prompts done on my actual card. I mean, I was down to the last day of September finishing my card. But in the meantime, I was reading a lot of other things, so that by the end of September, I had a book I could count for all 80 prompts. And then I have 10 more books that I didn't count for anything. So these are going to be posted on Sarah's Goodreads group. Probably at the same time that I post this video, I will also post this list on her threads for the Summer Romance Book Bingo. So I'm not going to go over this whole list here in this video, and I'm not even going to put them all in the description because I feel like it will just be too much. I will put a link to her Goodreads group in the description. So if you want to go and look up the whole list of books that I read for the months of June, July, August, and September, then I would love for you to do that, and then come back and chat with me about any of the books that you see that interest you, or maybe books you've read or you're curious about or whatever. So that covers all 90 books. But since this is also a wrap-up of the Summer Romance Book Bingo, I will share with you what I had on my card and what I read for each of those prompts. So one thing I also wanted to mention is that a total of 27 of the 90 books that I read were from my own shelves. I feel like it could have been more. A couple of them were recent acquisitions, like the ones I got as review books or whatever, and a few of them had been on my shelves for quite a while. But still, I'm excited that I got this many books off of my shelves read. Now, some of these books from my shelf I did listen to on audio, but I can still count them as read, and they are on my shelves, so I'm happy about that. And I'm working on getting several more from my shelves read between now and the end of the year on my Stackmas challenge. So the first prompt that I had, and I'm going to go, not that it matters, but I'm going to go across. I'm going to go from left to right, going across. And the first one that I had, the first prompt, was to read a book written by an author who uses a pseudonym. So I picked Book Club Babies by Ashton Lee. Ashton Lee is a pseudonym, and I don't know if I'm at liberty to say the author's real name. I know that he did tell me he is writing some books, I think Cozy Mysteries, under his actual name. I have not seen his name, actual name, linked up yet with his pseudonym names, so I'm not going to tell that to you at this moment, but I know for a fact that Ashton Lee is a pseudonym because we are friends on Facebook. Okay, the next one is A Romance with a Musician. And this is a book I have because I have several Sarah Dessen books. I picked This Lullaby by Sarah Dessen because I remembered that I had a book with this guitar on it. And so this turned out to be one of my least favorite books of the whole summer. This is one of the 3 2-star books. And I just didn't like it. If you want to read a book about teenagers drinking and talking about having sex and all of that, you know, that's what you got in this book. And I was not a fan of it. Now, they were graduated from high school, but just graduated from high school. It took place in the summer between high school and college, and it was about this group of kids, and I just wasn't a fan. The next one I had was to read a book that was written before you were born. In my 20 by 20 challenge, I am trying to read several Grace Livingston Hill books. These were all written in the early 1900s, and so I read Bright Arrows by Grace Livingston Hill, and I really enjoyed it. It was just sweet and wonderful, and I really want to make an effort to read more Grace Livingston Hill in 2020 because I just enjoyed it so much. The next one was to read a book with a one-word title. The one I set out to read was Maud by Melanie J. Fishbane, which was a story about the life of Lucy Maud Montgomery, but I just couldn't get through it quick enough, and I wanted to savor it. I purchased a copy, and I just didn't want to rush through it. So I had a couple of Sunshine State books with one-word titles, and so I'm counting Breakout by Kate Messner for this prompt. I didn't want to count Breakout because that's really a compound word. I feel like that's still 2 words, but it's written as 1 word on the title, so it counts. And then the last one in the top line was to read a book with the letters S-U-N somewhere in the title. So for that prompt, I am also counting one of the Sunshine State books, The Adventurers Guild. I believe the author's name is Zach Lauren Clark. And, you know, there were 2 prompts like this. One you had to spell out sun, and one you had to spell out beach. And those were kind of hard. I don't know. It was just hard to find books that had those combinations of letters. So for the beach one, I ended up just counting a book that had the word beach because that was the only way I could find that combination of letters, except in a couple of books that I needed to use for different prompts. So anyway, so those last 2 books were not romances, but again, they didn't have to be. Then on the next line, the next prompt was very easy. It just said to read the next in a series. So I could have counted any books for that, but I did decide to count one of the first 2 books that I listened to at the beginning of the summer. I read 2 books in the Cobbled Court series by Marie Bostwick. One of them is Ties That Bind, and the other one is Threading the Needle. I ended up counting Threading the Needle for a prompt that you had to have double letters in the title. So I used this one for the prompt on my card, which was to read the next in a series. And as you can see, these go right here on my shelf. This series is a big favorite of my sister's. She's the one that first encouraged me to read these, and they are very, very good. Not really romances. I would just classify them as women's fiction. Sometimes you see them on lists of books that are faith-based, and I believe the author is a Christian, but these are not what I would consider Christian books. They are just good, clean books, and very good. All right, the next one is to read a book with more than 10,000 reviews. I read Lilac Girls by Martha Hall Kelly. I read that for book club, and it was tough. It was a tough read, but it was one of the few books on of all of these 90 that had more than 10,000 reviews. So my next prompt was to read a romance set at the beach. Well, I mentioned The Beach House by Mary Alice Monroe already. I ended up counting it for the prompt to spell out B-E-A-C-H. So for this one, I counted the second book in that series, which is called Swimming Lessons. It's also about turtles. It's also set at the beach. And even though it's really what I would consider more women's fiction than a romance, there definitely is a romance in it. So I think I can count it. The next prompt on my card was to read a romance with a cowboy. Now, incidentally, there were a few prompts that were duplicated on the list of 80. And I happened to get both of the prompts to read a cowboy romance on my card. So I just got to read more than one cowboy romance. I actually ended up reading, I think, a total of 3 cowboy romances, but one of them had a one-word title, and that was another one that was sort of duplicated. There was a prompt that was to read a romance with one-word title and then to read a book with a one-word title. So anyway, it was a lot of fun just trying to plug everything in and make everything count. So what I ended up reading for that one was City Girl by Lori Wick. And then the last prompt on that row was to read a contemporary romance. I realized that I don't read a lot of contemporary romances, but the one I'm counting for this one is a book that I read on ebook. I found it on Hoopla. It's by an author named Lilac Mills, and it was called Summer on the Turquoise Coast. So Berna, this took place in Turkey, and I keep meaning to tell you about it, and I kept forgetting, but it was about some British people who are on vacation in Turkey, and it was about a grandmother who wanted her granddaughter to get out and live more. She felt like her granddaughter was just kind of wasting away, and the grandmother was recently widowed, and she wanted to just get out in the world and have some fun. And so the grandmother does a little bit of misbehaving, at least what I would consider misbehaving in the book, but it all turns out nice, and it was a pretty good book. So Berna, I just thought I would let you know that I read a book that took place in Turkey this year. And in case the rest of you are wondering who Berna is, she has a fairly new booktube channel. I will link it down below. She lives in Turkey, and I believe it's called Berna's Bookish Adventures, and she has already posted quite a few videos. In fact, I'm behind on a few of them, and she is just wonderful to watch and listen to, and I would encourage you to check out her channel and give her some more subscribers. Then starting out on the third row, it was a romance with a one-word title, and as I mentioned before, I read a cowboy romance for that one. It was called Hope. It was actually a mail-order bride story. It was by Lori Copeland. It's book 3 in the mail-order bride series. There's still 3 more to read in that series, and it's just really a good series. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And then the next one was to read a book with a yellow cover. So for that prompt, I read one of my Sunshine State books called Slider. It was one of my 5-star books. I really enjoyed it. It was about a boy who wanted to do eating events as a sport, and it was just a really good book. I just loved it. Then the next one was Reader's Choice. So I ended up counting one of my Audible category books for that. The one I counted was Mermaid Inc. by Caroline Mickelson. And then the next one was the Harlequin or Mills and Boone category romance. So I finally read a book that Catherine hosted as a read-along for March Mystery Madness. It was a love-inspired suspense novel. It was called Mission to Protect. It's the first book in the Military Canine series, and I really, really enjoyed it. I want to go ahead and read the rest of the series. There's either 8 or 12 of them in the series, and I thought it was excellent. It is, because it's love-inspired, it is faith-based, and I really enjoyed it. The next one is to read a book you bought for the cover. Well, I could have counted either of these, but I used one of these for a different prompt. I read 2 books in the Welcome to Tyler series. I buddy read these with my friend Mandy Garrett. When I watched her Summer Romance Bingo TBR last year, she was reading one of the earlier books in the series, and I had already read, I believe it was book 2, and I had already read book 2, and so I mentioned to her that it could count as a sports romance because it's about a couple of coaches. So we ended up buddy reading book 3 last year as well, and so this year we read books 4 and 5. Book 4 is Monkey Wrench, and book 5 is Blazing Star. I was first attracted to this series because of the covers. Now, I don't know which book I bought first. There's 12 in the series. These were released back in the 90s, one a month, and they all have this quilt design, but in different colors. So I collected the whole series simply because of the covers. So now I'm finally reading them and enjoying them. Okay, starting the next line is to read a book that is blurbed by a favorite author. Well, I knew instantly when I saw that I was going to definitely read a Miss Read book, because all of these newer editions of the Miss Read books are blurbed by Jan Karon. So on this Fairacre book, it says, if you've ever enjoyed a visit to Mitford, you'll relish a visit to Fairacre. And I definitely agree. So Jan Karon is my all-time favorite author, my favorite series, and so that made this a perfect book to read for the Summer Romance Book Bingo. This is Village School. I showed it earlier. It's the first book in the Fair Acre series. This is another one of my 3 books that I rated 2 stars. I did not enjoy this at all. This is Open House by Elizabeth Berg. It met the prompt to read a book whose author shares your first or last name. So I have several Elizabeth Berg books on my shelf. I started collecting them because they have fantastic covers. I just love the covers, and I'm completely drawn in to the covers. I have only read one of them before this one, and I enjoyed it much more than this one. So I'm hoping that all the other books I have on my shelf I will like better than this one. And I can't remember everything that I didn't like about this one, but I just thought it was depressing, and I just didn't care for it. So the next prompt was also to read a cowboy romance, and for this one I listened to a book on Audible. It was on the Audible romance package, and I don't even remember putting it in my library, but somehow it was there. It must have been recommended maybe by Sarah or another booktuber, and I thought it sounded good, so I added it to my Audible library, and it was called Heartbeat by Joan Johnston. And then the next one was to read a book set in 2 time periods. Well, for that prompt, I read The House at Riverton by Kate Morton. This is also called The Shifting Fog. In fact, if you look for this on Audible, that's the title. I believe that was its original title, maybe when it was released in the UK, and then the US title is The House at Riverton. Anyway, I led this as a read-along, and so a few of you guys read it with me, and it wasn't as good as Forgotten Garden, but I still really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I read it. Then the next prompt was to read a book that you borrowed, and for that prompt I read a middle grade book called The Fallen Star by Tracy Hecht. It was book 3 in the Nocturnal series. My camera just fell off and onto the ground and broke my little tripod that it sits on. So anyway, it's a different angle now. But I want to finish this up real quickly because I'm running out of battery. And the next prompt was to read a 2019 Rita finalist. And these kind of stumped me because, I don't know, I never know what to read, but I went down to the inspiration category and I found a book called The Saturday Night Supper Club by Carla Lariano, and I loved it so much that I found the second book. Both of them are on audio on Hoopla, and I love them. They are very lightly faith-based and just very clean, and I thoroughly enjoyed both of them. The second one was called Brunch at the Bittersweet Cafe, and I would definitely recommend them. So then the next one on the last line was to read a book with summer bugs on the cover. Well, originally I was going to read Spindle's End by Robin McKinley, but I just couldn't get it done. So I ended up using one of my Sunshine State books called Boy X. And if you look at the picture, there is a spider right in the middle of the X that's right on the boy's shirt, and so that's what I'm counting for this challenge. Then the third book was to read a book with a red cover. Well, I read a really good book called The Amish Christmas Letters that has an all red cover. I needed that one for a different prompt, so I ended up reading a book that had the word red on the cover, and it had some red on the cover, so we're just gonna have to go with it. It was called Murder in Red. It was book 49 in the Murder, She Wrote series by Jessica Fletcher. So that is what I'm counting for this challenge. Then the next category was to read an Amish book, and that's where I counted the Amish Christmas Letters. It was by, I think, 4 different authors maybe. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very good. It was kind of like 4 short stories, and I think they were related somehow, but I'm not sure. I can't remember that much about it, but I enjoyed them all. And I did read some other Amish books that I counted for other things. I finished up the Amish Quilt Shop Mystery Series, and so I counted all of those books for different challenges. But for this one, I'm counting Amish Christmas Letters. And then for the very last one, it was to read a book set in your country, which is the United States. So I counted one of the Cat in the Stacks mysteries called No Cats Allowed by Miranda James. So that's everything for my card on the Summer Romance Book Bingo. If you want to see what I read that fit all 80 of the prompts, and I'll even list the other 10 books that I read just so you can see all 90 books that I read this summer, and those will be on Sarah's Goodreads group under the thread Summer Romance Book Bingo, or hashtag SRBB 19, I think, or 2019. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. If you participated in the Summer Romance Book Bingo, let me know down below. Let me know how it went for you. I have seen a couple of the wrap-ups, and I have read some of the wrap-ups on the Goodreads group, so I know that a lot of people read a lot of really great books this summer, and this is what I read. So that's all I have for this video. I hope you're having a great day. Read a good book, and God bless you.